Hello, I'm Milton Schlosser, and it's my honor and delight to perform my good buddy Nick Howells' piece Crowfoot. And I mean good buddy in the best way because we're good friends, and you're going to hear a little bit from Nick about the piece. But one of the things that I need you to help me out with is that at one point in this piece, Nick tries to create the sounds of a buffalo hunt. And so what's going to happen is that I'm going to turn to you and I'm going to make this I think it's a very non-Western European conductor sort of gesture like this. It looks like rain falling. And basically what I need you to do is to start rustling your feet, just a little bit. And over the course of a minute and a half, you're going to hear the piano music get louder and louder, and you can get louder and louder with your feet. And then there's going to be a big crash bang, where I stop, and you can just stop at that point as well. But that's one of the elements of Aboriginal culture. There is no audience in Aboriginal music. There's the sense of communal sort of participation, and so this is where, from my very Western European, classically trained perspective, that barrier between audience and performer get broken down. You get to also be not only part of the performance, but even part of the composer at that point. So that's really, I think, all I'm going to say.
Hello, can you hear me? No. Right. No, oh, sorry. Okay, so I actually had a few things that I was going to say, but sort of listening how this event is taking place, I actually might not say too much about the piece, just because some of you were at the dialogic session last night. And so I might wait until after, and then we can, you can ask me questions, or we can enter into a dialogue together, and you can pick my mind. Now, I will say a few things. So with this piece, there is a quote in it, and I'm not aware. I don't know if those that were present last night had the English translation. No. Okay. So I will speak the quote in English before Milton plays. And I just will say one word, or a few words. I think similar, thank you, Naomi. I think similar, I feel a connection with, I think, your process and why you're writing, and I feel this connection with why I was writing this piece. And I think the big thing that when I started writing this piece, was using the compositional process as a tool to try and reconnect with something that was lost on me just growing up, I guess, in a small community in South Central Alberta. And so using what I know how to do, what I'm familiar with, my music, as a means to start to, find meaning, with my history and how that reflects with myself. So just some thoughts. So the quote, written or spoken by Chief Crowfoot, some of his last words before he passed away, and it reads, "What is life? It is the flash of a firefly in the night. It is the breath of a buffalo in the wintertime. It is the little shadow which runs across the grass and loses itself in the sunset."
Taskens, Wasket Swisses, Tipiska, Taskens, Koskorostos,
The same group of people met last night. I should tell you that the methodology, we explore sensory deprivation and how that informs our reception of art. So we were in a room, by this time it was 8:30 at night. All the shades were pulled and the windows were only in the back and it was already way past sundown. So it was quite dark in the room. And then we turned out the lights. Nobody was told the instruments. Nobody was told the composer. Nobody knew the title of this composition. They had absolutely no reference except sound. And then we invited them to reflect on what they had just heard. And here's a bit of the process. Here's what one of the seminar members wrote, and I should say here, of course, they have no text, they have no visual referent. I asked them first to write one word about what they had heard, then to write one sentence, then one paragraph, and then exploring sensory deprivation and synthenesia, that is to say, how through one sensory perception we associate it with another. I asked them, what did you see when you heard these sounds? And then I asked them, where did you go when you listened to these sounds? Then I asked them, what did you want to do as you were listening? What did it make you want to do? And then also exploring the relationship between psychological distance and chronological distance, I asked each one of them, how long was this piece? And I have to tell you, some people said 5 minutes. In fact, one person put 4 minutes and 58 seconds. And at the other end, another person put it at 20 minutes and 43 seconds. Very interesting to see the difference in perception, both psychologically and chronologically, of this phenomenon we call music. Then I asked them if they'd please give a title to it, and would they please give their definition of music. How do you define music? And as in part of your response, could you please tell us, for you, what's the difference between sound and music. What makes some sounds music and others not? Well, here's one of the members of the seminar last night. One word, unresolved. One sentence. I wonder how this story is going to turn out. One paragraph. Are we stronger or weaker for having come through chaos, turmoil, and disruption? The beginning was so joyful, and yet the music was grounded in these solid chords. I don't think there is any way to go back. The future will be different. What I saw? Initially, I saw Julie Andrews from The Sound of Music dancing around the Austrian Alps. The hills are alive! Then, it was incredibly dark. A fearful dark that led into a gray, dirty place of mourning. Sight and feeling are awfully closely linked here. The drums turn the scene into something aboriginal. Cree people on the prairie, slightly dispossessed, determined, resilient. Where did I go? I went to Hobbema. I think it is the most aboriginal place I know. Every place else is just really pretty white, pretty European. The Aboriginal stuff is almost erased from the landscape. What I wanted to do, this piece made me want to know more and to get to know others more deeply. A little revelation stirs a hunger for intimacy and connection. How long? They thought it was 10 minutes and 32 seconds. And in actual fact, it's 11 minutes and 6 seconds. So they were pretty close. What did they title this? And keep in mind, they have absolutely no idea who they're listening to. No reference point whatsoever. They titled this, Seeking Home. I think that this piece was a piece about trying to claim and rebuild identity. My definition of music, organized sound that uncovers the soul. What's the difference between sound and music? I think that I hit the nail on the head in my definition. If it doesn't uncover, it ain't music. So we invite Mr. Howells first to respond.
There's so much there. I don't even know where to start. Well, thank you very much. Maybe I'll...
Okay.
I have a lot that I can talk about. I think the one thing that really stuck out just listening to this was the comment about the darkness of the piece, and that's not the first time I've had... that's not the first time I've had a comment like that, just sort of talking about some of the more dark moments of the piece. And I suppose for myself, this piece came about, like I was saying before, it was a tool for me to reconnect with a history that I really don't know. And there's much more to it than just that, but growing up in a real small community in Alberta, there was not representation of Aboriginal culture or Métis culture or anything like that. And so, although I did grow up, one of my best friends was Cree, and I spent a lot of time hunting and fishing and getting into trouble with him. And I learned a lot from that family. But with that, though, growing up in a small community, we want to assimilate ourselves with our friends and the people around us, and so we tend to avoid the parts about us that would make us different or cause us to maybe seem different than others. And so for myself, this is one of the things that I had to confront in writing this piece, is looking back at my childhood and seeing how some stereotypes and things like that affected me growing up. And I think I avoided that for a very long time, actually. Well, probably, even into college when I went to Red Deer College. Just sort of not talking about that part of my life very much, because I think I sort of convinced myself that this part of my life doesn't mean so much, or it's just something I don't really want to involve myself with. And so, naturally in the piece, there's moments, the specific one I can think of is when Milton's doing some singing. For me, it's a very sensitive moment, it's a very vulnerable moment, and it's a little bit of the feelings of guilt, I suppose, for maybe the way that I once viewed myself growing up. The Buffalo Run, when I think about that personally, I think it's this moment of sort of breaking through these barriers that I put up growing up. And so, there is moments of darkness in the piece. It does resolve towards the end. As the drums start to fall in line with the rhythm of the piece. When they first come in, it's a little more scattered. The connection's not there, and as the piece progresses, the different elements I was hoping would come together and at least form some kind of connection or a start of some kind of resolve to these experiences, my own personal experiences.
And our resident pianist, Professor Schlosser, would you dialogue with what you just heard the seminar member write and your colleague?
There's a number of things that as Nick was talking, and as the dialogue sort of comments were read, that came to mind. One is how lucky I am to work here at Augustana, because we don't wait for graduate students to do good stuff. So when Nick graduated, it was like, Nick, you need to write me a piece. So that's what struck me. The other thing that struck me is I also am lucky because Nick's training at Red Deer, but also his creativity is so much fun, and so much fun for me to work with, that I knew that I could have something quite special in terms of composition that I would commission him to do. So some of you know this, but I've just been recording a CD, and this work is on it, as well as the Brahms that I played in the fall. And it's called 1890, which is kind of funky because in 1890 something major happens in Johannes Brahms' life, this white European composer, who's also a little bit melancholic and reflecting on death. And then we have the words of Crowfoot. And so to me it's kind of a cross-cultural moment. And the other thing that the commenter said was, music as being organized sound. And I think in my life now I sort of quote the feminist musicologist Susan McClary, whose quotation was probably one of the most freeing things I heard when I did my doctoral studies in the early 90s. And she just says, I don't know what music, and she capitalizes every letter. She doesn't, I don't know what music is anymore. Because of course she's talking about a white male canon. And I think that's where I'm at, and I love it. Because Norman and I were chatting last night, you know, I premiered this piece internationally in Tokyo. And the piece obviously would be seen as exotic and by a Japanese audience, and it was. But as Norman talked about, there's also, even though music is not a universal language as such, Japanese culture has drums. The Japanese have indigenous people, and so, anyway, these are just some ramblings here. But the other thing that also, Nick was talking about this moment where I hum, and he was talking about how it reads to him. And it's fascinating because Nick is one of the few piano students that I've had who, when I talked to him about the power of meditation to lessen anxiety and to go to a deeper level, took me quite seriously. And so he, in his vulnerability, gives me a great gift because at that moment in the composition, I know that as a pianist, I'm transgressing every rule written for pianists. You're not supposed to sing in public and play the piano. You're not supposed to say things, especially Cree. You're not supposed to play something else with your foot. You know, there's all this stuff that has accumulated since the middle of the 19th century. But at that moment, in some of my former yoga gurus here, it's this wonderful moment of openness and of vulnerability, but a place of wisdom. And it's because I have to use my breath. And pianists often experience anxiety because we hold our breath. And so this piece has this kind of built-in wisdom into it, and that I have to sing, and it's kind of an awkward note too, which I told Nick. And I tried it singing an octave lower, but he and Ardell Reese, you know, congratulated me for singing the note that I do, and it's supposed to have harmonics and stuff, but it taps into a meditative, contemplative tradition as well. And I describe Nick as an old soul, and that's what comes through to me in this piece.
Well, folks, it's a dialogue, a collective conversation. It's your turn to ask questions and to talk. Who would like to ask a question about what we've just heard and the comments that were written? Yes, Professor.
Nick, I was at this dialogic session last night, and for me, I could never imagine doing it. Even at the beginning, for me, there was always a sad element to it because it was minor key. Was there an intention? And maybe I might be misinterpreting the key. Did you have an intention? Was there a sadness that you intended?
Actually, I'll talk a little bit about just the structure, or one of my first thoughts about writing this piece. I do teach piano, and so I'm familiar with the teaching resources that are out there for teaching young children. And so I was looking at the Royal Conservatorial, the Guitar Books Bastion in Milford, and I was sort of looking for a representation of Aboriginal music in that. And what you always come up with is the little mentions like Indian dance or Indian song. Actually, I'm just going to I'll just leave this up here. So everyone is just about the same, and what you do is you have an interval of fifth in the left hand, that's the drums, and then you get the little melody on top. So anyone who's taken piano before has probably played that song or something very similar to it. And so that was one of the very first things that I thought about in writing this, and so I was asking myself, why would this seem Aboriginal? And obviously it's the left hand representing drums, and it's always in an interval of fifth, which, in classical music is actually, probably one of the most powerful intervals. Beethoven, the interval, the relationship between the dominant and tonic, very, very powerful. So what I wanted to do, though, obviously I put the drums had the drums actually drummed, and I wanted to do something more interesting with this. You know, if the interval fifth is Aboriginal, what can I do with that? And so what you hear is shifting on these fifths on top of each other. Throughout the whole piece, you can sort of hear that. And so now, when they're shifted chromatically, it gives a very dark, maybe sound. Anyhow, the majority of the piece is written using interval of fifths. There are a few places where that's not happening, but I think that's where the sound is coming from. It just happens to be my favorite sound on the piano too. But I think, you know, with my own reflecting on why I was writing this piece, asking myself questions, you know, what does it, well, at the beginning of the quote, you know, who am I, or what is life? Sorry, thinking of it. Who am I? What is life? But yeah, asking that eternal question, who am I? I suppose you have to, I found that I have to explore some of those areas in my life that maybe I avoid, and often those aren't the most happy places. So I think that comes out through the relationship with yeah.
That was great. Thank you, Rick. Oh, Ms. McKilby.
Thanks, Nick, for composing this piece and Milton for performing it. It's the second time I've heard it. It's great each time. Nick, do you know, I think you're Métis, do you know which Aboriginal group you're Métis through? So that's question number one. And the second question is, what drew you to Crowfoot?
Well, this is still a learning process for me. And it's sometimes intimidating a little bit to come to an event like this and speak in front of intellectuals and academics. I have to remind myself that this isn't always about, for myself, it's not always a pursuit of knowledge, but it's more often just a pursuit of trying to better learn how to communicate the things that I already understand. And so it's still a process for me finding my history. I've spent a lot of time talking with family members where I've learned, you know, there's a few people in my family that have held on to our history. The Dogwood Cree is on my dad's side of the family, and that would have been in everyone was in the Peace River area. I've kind of lost my train of thought here. Oh, Crowfoot. Well, actually, Milton introduced me to the quote, first of all. Now, I haven't found the book. There is writing somewhere, I think in our family somewhere, I haven't found it yet. But there was some interaction between one of my relatives, John Cunningham, and Crowfoot. And so I'm a little bit unfamiliar, I don't know all the details to that. But that was kind of interesting for me to know that there might have been this connection. My background is Cree, Crowfoot was not Cree. So I had to translate it into Cree to represent my history. But I was drawn to the quote because of its imagery. This is something that resonates with me. I spend a lot of time, you know, especially in the summertime, I spend a lot of time outdoors. You know, I'll go live in the back of my truck for driving around the back roads of BC for a couple months because it's, for me, it's just this really peaceful time. You know, fishing and gold panning and doing all these things. But I connected with that because of the simplicity, I suppose. You know, discussion, what is life? And then, you know, these images that are brought up that are the most simple images, yet really, really beautiful. as soon as I read it, I can do something with this. This reminds me of myself. So.
It kind of reminds me of me.
Hearing you speak,
I feel connected to you because I've been teaching at home before. The last couple of years I've been teaching, so it's wonderful.
thank you for the question.
Well, Mr. Howells, here's another person. It's the same piece, Crowfoot. We're in that absolutely pitch black room, and because time is of the essence now, we'll share with you what this seminar member wrote, what I saw when I listened. I saw a journey through chaos, beauty, turmoil, creativity. I saw soil being tilled and seeds being planted. I smelled and felt thunder and rain. I sense there is no stopping or jumping off this journey. It is infinite. How to stay the course. Let the elements, all present in the present, guide. Rain, lightning, thunder, forest, eagles, sun, stream, river. Where did I go? I was taken from the light-hearted la-da-da-da-da to the oh, holy shit. Pay attention. This is your life. How are you going to live it? What is growing and what is dying? What did this make me want to do? My blood was rushing. My whole being was being called out to participate, to play, to renounce my doubts and my dark and my shame, my not knowing, and to shout out my truth. How long did they think it was? 8 minutes.
Wow. There's a lot of beautiful writing in there. I love how just listening to this, this person came up with this beautiful imagery of this, this natural world, the different elements, some of the raw elements of nature. That reflects with me. This is I'm not sure where to begin with this. The rawness of nature has always been a really powerful element in my life. Growing up, learning the piano, my poor siblings and the rest of my family, they would call it Nick's crazy up and down. And basically, when a storm would start to roll through, I was at the piano. We had these large windows at the front of our house, and the storm would come through, and there's all this thunder and lightning, and I was just learning how to play the piano, and it was so exciting for me because I'd just sit there and smash on the piano. It didn't matter what sound was coming out. It was just sound, but to me, it was music. So, yeah, defining sound of music, I can't define that. For me, it was music. Very powerful influence on me, and I'm really pleased that someone else is seeing that just through listening, and without having any other distractions or any visual things happening, just being able to hear that. It's quite nice to hear.
Well, we'll pass the mic to Professor Schlosser. Finishing off what this seminar member wrote, what is my working definition of music? God at play. What is the difference between sound and music? Is there a difference? Mozart.
Well, when we have music students here, I mean, the definition of music is debated about, but as someone who does meditation as a form of mental preparation for performance, of course, my definition now is so broader. It incorporates breath, it incorporates incidental sound, and that's what the pianist has to do on stage. You cough, you rustle, and that becomes part of the performance. And rather than a distraction, even in the midst of Mozart, it becomes part of Mozart. And perhaps that's what makes me different than people such as Arnold Schoenberg from the beginning of the 20th century, who felt that everything on the page was the music, and if you can't play it right, don't play it at all. Whereas Mozart couldn't have given a rat's ass. I mean, it's interesting because, as my students here, please forgive me, but I mean, when the great composers died, Mozart, Bach, their music died. They didn't perform Bach for 100 years, and then it was rediscovered. But to me, there's a raw element in music that keeps it always contemporary. There's a contemporaneity to it. And historically, what we do today kind of has defined music in a way that makes it really good for listening in CDs. That doesn't reflect the reality of a live audience. So, the notion that the holy shit, what's going on here in the piece, I think is really quite cool, and I think that's hopefully what art does. I just want to quickly mention one of the other pieces I've recorded by the composer Frederick Rzewski is called De Profundis, and the pianist speaks the text that Oscar Wilde wrote from prison, and he played the piano at the same time. And I've played for audiences of gays and lesbians who have found it, sometimes the reaction is, this is really sad, why do you perform this? Our lives are supposed to be triumphant and happy, and we want the struggle. And to me, this piece is similar. To me, this takes you to a different place. It's a contemplative place, and it's also a place where you both kind of honor the victory is won, but there's also pain, and there's reflection, and to me, it's a whole mix of things. So, music as God, to me, means music that has a wide variety of emotions and thoughts and elements in it. And that's what I like about mixed composition. To me, there's a wide variety of things in it. And the fifth that Nick talked about, that the piece is built on, is an ambiguous interval. We don't know if it's major or minor. So even though some people would have heard it as minor, actually, by definition, it's neither. And that's also one of the things that I find funky about it. To me, it is deliberately ambiguous, and yet you can hear different colors, sometimes darker, sometimes brighter.
Folks, our time is fast running out. Now, I don't have often the opportunity to see this, but I think in various hotel rooms, I saw a program, and this guy kept saying, "Is that your final answer?" Well, folks, this is the final question that we can ask about Crowfoot. Who would like the final question? Who would like to ask it? Okay, good job. Sure.
Just to echo what some of the previous seminar attendee wrote, I found the writing and the playing of the piece both to be very evocative of prairie light and land and weather. And that's not something that I hear often enough, so I just want to thank you both for that.
Thanks for the comment. Well, we're going to wrap this musical element, but I would be remiss if I did not say, and indeed go on record, because this is being filmed, over the course of 21 years of teaching, I've had the privilege of collaborating with some of the foremost composers of Canada and beyond. R. Murray Schafer, who is arguably Canada's foremost composer on the international scene, is one of my dialogue partners. David Amram, the first composer in residence at the New York Philharmonic, picked, I might add, by none other than Leonard Bernstein. I hear a lot of music, particularly because I'm in Montreal for 16 summers in a row. All the musicians and composers that come in, we do dialogic sessions throughout the Montreal International Jazz Festival. I want to go on record for saying this is one of the most exciting pieces of music I've heard in decades. Bravo.